Despite being a book that revolves around high school cliches, this one surprisingly doesn't have many. Salutations, welcome to Learning the Language of Literacy. My name is Sophia Lee, and today I'll be book talking Never All Is Sometimes by D.L. Said. This book was released in the beginning of August and has received a ton of pre-publication buzz. But the Goodreads average for this is only 3.46. This follows longtime best friends Dave and Julia, who the day before high school write down this list of nevers that they never wanted to do during high school to avoid becoming high school cliches. In the last months of their senior year, they decide to break all the rules they set for themselves and do everything on the list they claimed they would never do. This book is set up to be a cutesy contemporary with a ton of humor, embarrassing situations, and maybe even love, because Dave has been pining after Julia since the beginning of high school, which is number 8 on the nevers list. And of course, number 10 is never date your best friend. So I think we can all see how this goes. This was one of the books that I borrowed from the library without an 100% intention to actually read. It didn't even make the final cut of my September 2015 TBR video. But I have just been in a really huge reading slump since I started school. Not because I don't have the time, surprisingly, but just simply because I don't have the energy. I wake up at 6 a.m. every morning and don't get back home until 6 p.m. after cross country. So I'm really just exhausted after every day. And this book, which I could have normally read in one sitting, took me 4 days to read, which is cringeworthy for myself. Regardless, I'm glad that I read it, and I'm hoping to make a better system for reading during the school year, because at this rate, I'm going as slow as a snail, and my September wrap-up will be very bare. To point out a few things, I absolutely love list books. I think it just comes from me loving lists in general. To-do lists, supply lists, all the lists. And it was just really creative and fun to see how the items were checked off. It was very similar in that aspect to Since You've Been Gone by Morgan Matson. Another thing to point out is that this has that really weird dual point of view done in third person. The first, I would say, third of the book is told from David, and the second third is from Julia, and the final third is told from both of their point of views. And I actually like this because Rick Riordan does it in his Heroes of Olympus series, where you only get to see from that character's point of view and only get to hear from that character at that time. One of the huge aspects of this novel, which is actually quite small in terms of content, is the very subtle diversity. Of course, if you're in the bookish community, you've probably heard of the We Need Diverse Books campaign, because it just tries to push diversity with all these different matters of just media in general, books, movies, and TV shows, and making them more accurate to real life. You had the main plot, but there were all these little minor details and little things that happened that were very diverse. For example, Julia is adopted, and she still keeps in contact with her biological mom, but she was adopted by 2 gay men who she has an amazing relationship with. The other main character, Dave's mom, passed away when he was little, and his father and his brother are just such a really good core support group for him as well. And there were just a bunch of little things like Dave being Hispanic and little flourishes that added so much to the book. And I think this is an excellent example of the future of YA, because it wasn't made a big deal of. I gave this book a solid 66% on my scale because I just wasn't that invested in Julia and Dave's story. My biggest issue that brought the rating down was its unrealistic turn of events, as well as just the rules of real life that were kind of broken and bent for the sake of the novel. For example, Julia and Dave were best friends the entire 4 years of high school, but they really didn't have any other friends besides each other. Also, 2 of the nevers in this book deal with parties having beer in them, and there is a lot of alcohol consumption with underage teens. And this, of course, happens a lot in YA, but it really wasn't needed, especially with the lengths that Julia took it. One last factor I had an issue with was the fact that even though it was their senior year of high school and their last 2 or 3 months, they were still ditching class a lot, and their grades could definitely have suffered. And both of them had scholarships to prominent colleges, and I really don't think they should have or would have been that reckless. One last thing I'm going to point out before I say goodbye to non-spoiler people is that with their relationship, Dave suffered from a very serious Margot complex. If you don't know, she's from Paper Towns, where he had this sincere and almost overwhelming admiration for Julia and who she was. And even though it was acceptable because the 2 of them had known each other for such a long time, there seemed to be such an imbalance of power that could have been mistaken just for having a crush on a girl, but I thought with the way D.L. Said portrayed it, it was a little bit extreme. Also, there is a secondary character called Gretchen in the story who provides conflict for the 2 of them, and I personally couldn't distinguish that well between Julia and Gretchen. In case you haven't read this book, I would advise you to go away right now, because this is a book you do not want spoiled, especially with the way things go down. Bye, non-spoiler people. Hello! Wow, there is a lot to discuss. I just want to point out really quickly that I can see exactly how A.T.L. Stein's debut was a road trip novel, because even with the really small road trip Julia and Dave went on, it was just so cute. I can't wait to see if I decide to read Let's Get Lost, how it's portrayed. There were just so many cute little moments like the road trip and the way he surprised her with the concert tickets, and then there was the GPS drawing that Gretchen showed him. I've heard about that kind of thing with running, but I've never actually thought you could translate it to driving, though it'd be really easy because running is a lot of work and driving isn't, but nonetheless it seemed like such a fun idea, and if I get a boyfriend again anytime soon, I would definitely like to try it out with him. Also, no matter how cheesy it is, the promposal was absolutely priceless. I love again how A.T.L. Stein broke it down into lists with the 12 different roses and how he got so many people involved with everything. But again, with the unrealistic factors, how did these kids have so much money? They hired people, they bought things throughout the entire novel and basically just exploited a bunch of funds. And I'm honestly unsure of how any teenager could do this, especially because they didn't have jobs or any other source of income. All of the Nevers had a specific connection in the way that they all came together at the end of the story, and a lot of them worked towards something or some big inciting incident. But the one thing I really didn't understand that much was the hair dye, because I don't know how many people actually get their hair dyed. It's not that terrible of a thing, and basically the only cliche that involves hair dye has to do with the outsiders and the hipster people. And if anything, they'd rather be mistaken for that cliche than the normal high school cliche. So I was really kind of confused. I absolutely died when Brett and David and Julia built the treehouse. It was unrealistic, but at the same time, so freaking awesome, because I don't know what I would do if a treehouse sprouted up in the middle of my high school campus, but I would definitely eat lunch there every single day. And that was what got his name on the ballot. For the record, I am so glad he did not win prom king. That just would have been weird and awkward for the story and really just not needed. The road trip was so sweet until they professed their love for each other and had sex on the beach. We already dealt with the fact that was a cliche. That wasn't my issue with it, but at the same time, even if you're best friends, even if you know each other inside and out, even if you've slept over at each other's houses, hang out all the time, I just did not like and didn't feel comfortable as a reader. The one moment Dave was dating Gretchen, and the next moment he was having sex with his best friend on the beach. Like, that's just not cool, man. Not cool. That part of the relationship seemed so rushed, and it was just uncomfortable. Another problem I had with the story was the extreme partying, just because she threw basically a rave at her house, and her dads, they grounded her, but they didn't do anything that huge. They didn't take away her phone. They didn't give her any consequences. I'm never a prude, and I'm never one to be overprotective, but it just seemed to cross a line into what the heck is going on in these people's head, especially with how responsible they seem throughout the entire rest of the novel. Everyone assumed that this story was going towards Julia and Dave finally ending up together, and I have to admit I was fooled up until everything happened. Like, normally I have this slight feeling of anticipation right before it happens, but I was completely clueless, and I actually really liked it that way and respect A.T.L. Stein for making that decision. But I was also kind of worried because they were together by page 220, and there was still a lot of the story. And in the last 50 to 80 pages in a YA contemporary, that's usually where most things go down, and that's where the characters go into their darkest moment and come right back up. The sequence of events went from Dave cheating on Gretchen with Julia, and it was just really cliche. It wasn't cliche in an original way either, but just bad when Julia and Dave were kissing outside his house and Gretchen had driven up. I personally didn't see how it changed that many things, just because there's kissing involved and they've always been best friends. But it mostly had to do with Dave's desire to be with Gretchen and just the way that they worked well as friends. And I've actually had that kind of relationship before where it was good to be in a romantic relationship, but I know we would not have survived as friends. So I kind of understand the opposite of that. I was so surprised with Maroney's presence in the treehouse. I thought it was just awkward and weird because he was a teacher. He kind of seemed like just this cardboard cutout and a little obstacle in the way of their entire plot. But I sincerely liked, but was really confused at the same time with his mathematical analogy towards relationships, but I think it was definitely a good thing, and it made us as readers see him as a more dimensional character than the just little cardboard figurehead he was previously. It was really astounding to see how much of a grown-up and how much of an adult position Gretchen put herself in terms of her relationship with Dave. I was like, oh my god, Brett, what the hell are you doing? And I did genuinely think that Julia would say yes to him, but then after I finished the book, I realized that she really wouldn't have, just because of how Margot-esque she is. She wouldn't have said yes, but it just would have seemed like such a weird, twisted turn of fate / events, and I think if there was a sequel, though there definitely should not be, then they would get together. In conclusion, I thought the story was cute, diverse, well developed in terms of character and plot, and it had a very unexpected turn of events, which I really adored and respected as a reader, because I've read so many contemporary novels where this would have gone in the exact direction I assumed it would. Tell me in the comments below if you've done any of the nevers on their list, whether you've made a list like this, what you thought of Dave and Julia's relationship as friends and both romantically, and what you thought of the story in general. I would love to know. Anyways, thank you so much for watching. Keep calm, read on, and I'll see everybody soon. Goodbye! If you enjoyed watching me ramble on about this book, give this video a big thumbs up and leave me a comment below. And if you liked it even more, hit the subscribe button. All my social media is around my face at SLS Books, and my previous videos are below me. Have a great night.